Hello and welcome to another LTP, that's Learn to Paint with Mike. That is to say, I am Mike and I am learning to paint, and you are welcome to join me. So, last episode we did some priming, I guess you could call it. I found out that the technique I've been using, where, one of Carissa's feet is coming off. I think I'm gonna glue it to the base real quick. Anyway, I learned this week that this technique of outlining to get detail and to plan out your model actually has a name called sketching. So I guess similar to sketching when you're planning to paint a picture. My daughter's here, by the way. When you're painting a picture, you might do a sketch to plan everything out. And so apparently this technique is called sketching. Okay, so we're going to start today putting some of the base coat, some of the base paint on here. As you can see, I've got some blue, and the technique that I've been using, and a piece of good advice that, well, some advice that I think is good anyway. You would think I would have all my paints ready to go before pushing the record button. All right. Back to what I was saying. The technique that I've been using that I like, I don't know if it's a technique or whatever. Essentially, you start with the parts of the model that are most difficult to get to. So, for instance, you'd start like in this armpit, and in the crotch here, and the face. Essentially working your way from the inner portions of the model to the outer portions of the model. So from in to out. And what that does is, let's say I'm doing my blue, and I'm putting my blue in here, and I go, oops, onto some of this armor or something. Well, I haven't already painted that armor, so it's not messing up something I've already done. So I can just get in there, and it allows you to be a little more messy. It allows you to be a little bit sloppy. I've determined that I'm going to kind of follow this same pattern with a blue cloak and red dress. Now, Carissa here doesn't have a lot of cloth. On the back side we have all these feathers. We've got these scale armor. So she's got this little bit of a dress here, and then the inside of the cloak. So I'm going to do this battle skirt in red, and this cloak, the inside of the cloak, in blue. So today I'm going to start with the red. So the red that I do, this is actually a mahogany paint. And just like, I mean, not quite exactly the same as when I was doing the sketching, but this paint is still pretty wet, pretty thin. I'm just going to put it there on the inside of the leg. This mahogany, when it is in its darkest shade, will be the darkest of the red. So I leave this first mahogany bit pretty thin, because then it will pool a little bit into the recesses, and then I'll end up highlighting the parts that are not as recessed. Let's see, not mahogany. Deep burgundy. Anyway, it's not a bright red color. It's kind of a dark red. So I'm going to hit that. Cover all this surface. I'm not too worried about supreme accuracy yet, because mostly I'm just getting this base coat on, getting some color onto the unit, onto this model. And you can see, just like with the brown wash, that the mahogany is kind of running into the, I keep calling it mahogany, the deep burgundy is running into the recesses. You can see I got some paint there on that weapon, but I'm not too worried about it because I haven't done the weapon yet, so I can worry about that later. Now this is just a little bit too thin, so I'm actually going to remove some of that paint. I'm going to use a slightly thicker mix. I'll take some more of this paint to mix in there. They're still pretty thin, probably thinner than I'd like it to be, but I think it'll cover okay. And this is just our base coat. We're going in to get all the darkest recesses. See, I'm getting some on these feathers, accidentally splashing some on the cloak. Now a model like this, where you've got this cloak right up next to the skirt, this is a model that you might consider painting the parts separately and then gluing them once they've been painted, so then you don't get a whole bunch of red paint where you want your blue paint, and vice versa. But I've had a couple of bad experiences where I painted the components, then put them together, and they just fell apart because the painted surfaces were glued together, but the paint didn't stick well enough, and then suddenly my pieces fell off. Didn't remain glued together. Okay, so I'm going to allow that red to dry. I'm going to wash out my brush. Now I'm going to put on this blue. And roughly the same consistency, fairly thin, and actually I'm going to make some of this dark, like midnight blue into it, because again, this is going to be the portion that is in the darkest recesses, and I've been told, and it's held up fairly well, that the eye kind of catches the lightest color and kind of assumes that the whole surface is that lighter color and that the darker portions are just shadows, which is essentially the effect I want anyway. So, get there in the armpit. Now this brush is fairly long, and in that way it's a little bit inaccurate, or sloppy, if you will. So when it comes time to build up from this darkest shade, and I need to be a little bit more accurate, I'll be using a thinner brush. But for now, this brush will do okay. Alright, now, looks like she's actually got some feathers right in there. So once I'm done with the red down in here, I'll be painting those white again. Finish. So make sure we've got good coverage on all of this blue cape. I'm going to double check, make sure I didn't get any blue in on the red, and that actually looks pretty good. Okay. I was debating about whether to make her midriff bare, but I think that's kind of silly. If I were a warrior going into battle, I wouldn't want a bare midriff. Or even a cloth-covered midriff. I'm going to paint that the same as all the rest of the armor. Her breastplate and everything is all going to be armor. Similar to this, it'll be kind of a coppery with golden highlights and a dark sepia ink to darken the inner portions. And actually, while the rest of this dries, I am going to put a little bit, oh there we go, that's what I'll do. Hold on one moment. Okay, I decided that while I let that blue and red dry, and you can definitely see in here that the blue has really collected back in the recesses, and it's already be fairly easy for me to see the parts that I need to bring lighter. Same thing with that red. And once that dries, then I'll be able to put the next layers on. If I put the next layers on while it's still wet, then it gets mucky, and that automatic deepening of the recess colors pretty much just goes away. So while that's drying, I'm going to do a little bit on our bolt thrower here. Again, we're going to start with the inner recesses and work our way out. Now it appears that he's got some sort of belt, and I have been using red for all my belts, including my, oh, I don't have it here to see, but I'm going to have a little red. And it's fairly difficult to get in there and just hit the parts I want. Again, I'm not too terribly concerned because I'm going to be painting these outer portions later. And I'll be able to correct any little color splashes or problems. There we go. There we go. We'll do a little red here. There we go. To kind of tie it all in together, as though it's the belt that's holding his quiver on there. Now, it's possible that that belt is really like a loincloth, and it's just got a little piece of metal in the front. So I could paint up some bright red underpants. But I don't think I'll do that. I think I'll actually just make that all dark, probably this dark brown. There we go. Got a little bit of red on there. Now next, on these beasts, these desert beasts, I've been using just kind of a desert sand color, if you can see that, for their flesh tone. Now, I do want to leave this fairly thin because I don't want to totally cover up the sketching I did. Okay, we've got an arm in here. A little bit too thin, so it's kind of covering up there, so I'm going to pull some of that paint out. So this is going to be the, again, the darkest shade on this flesh, and I'll bring it up to a white. And then I'll add a little bit of kind of a fleshy pink color. Usually using the pink fleshy color like in the armpits, in the places where I feel like a lot of blood flow happens. So maybe like in all these, in all these rippling muscles, I'll add some pink in here. Now again, this is a little bit too thin. It's erasing what I would consider to be too much of the undercoat. And there we have a little bleed through, or bleed over, because I'm painting this right next to that red, which is still wet. Here we go. Let's get down in here. There we go. I'm going to hit up this tail here. There we go. Put it a little bit thicker right here to actually cover up those little red spots that we got on there. And we'll hit up this little part of his leg. We'll hit up this underside of his leg. Okay, I think that's it for that. And I am going to use some of this burnt umber. I'll just put it on the back side there, back side of his loincloth. on his britches. Now nobody's going to be looking under there because he'll be sitting like this on the table. But call me a completionist or whatever. I want it to have some paint on it. Alright, I'm gonna kind of put some of this brown on here. Oh, he's got some chain mail on his loincloth there. Okay, but that's the inner recesses there done. He's got a little bit of a hard to access area here on his chest. So we're going to put a little bit there. And a little bit on his other pectoral muscle. Now he's got a nice six-pack in there. Let's make sure that it's flesh colored and not just primer and umber wash. There we go. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I end up doing multiple models at a time. Because maybe I'm just not patient enough. But it seems like it takes forever for these models to dry. I'm not terribly worried about the spines here because I will be going over that with darker and darker pigments to get the kind of the painted burnt desert look. See, we put on that paint nice and thin, and you can still see that sketching coming right through there. It appears that he's got some armored scales on his neck, so we're not going to worry about painting those with the flesh color. Alright, let's hit up his shins, his calf muscles. He's got some remarkably thin ankles. How does he hold up his big old bulk on those little ankles? I know, it's magic. He's a dragon. The blight sustains him. Alright, I'm going to put just a little bit more dark in there. I think we're okay right here. Alright. That's all we can do with our bolt thrower till he starts to dry. Put him down. And let's look at our lovely lady Krissa. Well, you can still see the shine of the wet paint. So we're not going to try to do another layer there. So, on to the Nerif. Now, this beauty, she don't wear no armor. It's just flesh and scales. But she does have a lot of these little spots on the inside. And I just realized I got some brown paint in my flesh tone. And actually, it doesn't look too bad, so I'll continue to use it. Since this desert flesh color is actually the lowest color of my flesh tone. Now I will especially be doing some pinkish reddish right here in the gills. I call them gills. They look like gills, but it's not like they breathe water, so I don't know why they have those. Now the Nerif, she does not have a ranged weapon. I just kind of assumed that the gills there has something to do with their fire breathing. You know, they don't breathe water, they breathe fire because they're dragons. But the Nerif doesn't have a flame weapon, a fire breathing weapon. She has this lovely tail she wraps people up in, and she has her forehead and this pointy jaw that she smacks into people. Well, here we go. So I've been trying to decide how I want to do these wings. And I think I've come up with the final decision. In that I'm going to kind of go along with what I did with the Angelius, which I have right here. I kind of left the fleshy arm, the flesh color, and then started this accent kind of bony, stony color on the spine, you know, on the fingers, finger bone portions. Now it's not going to show up quite as much on the top here because the wing, you know, the stretched out wing skin covers up everything. It's not like the Angelius where the bony portions come all the way through on both sides. The Nerif mostly just has it on the bottom. Alright. I realize I'm kind of coming out here to the edges outside of the portion I said I was going to work on, which are these first inner parts. But you know, you kind of get into a flow and you just keep going. It's a little bit zen, or a little bit like mowing the lawn or washing the dishes or ironing your clothes. You just kind of get into the flow of it. And a little more paint on my brush. We'll just be adding this base flesh tone. There we go. The whole thing covered. There. Now we've lost some of the sharp details of the wash we did earlier, but I expect the details to come through. We didn't use a super heavy or super thick layer of paint, so the brown should come through as the thing dries. There we go. had a bit of extra of the sketching wash there. Yeah, and already you can kind of see it starting to come through. So we'll definitely need to put some extra flesh tone layers on that. Now we'll definitely be putting on some more layers because we don't want to just put on one big thick layer. You end up with some pretty poor results if you just put on one big thick layer or a layer of straight paint. It doesn't look natural. It looks like, well, like you just painted it. You lose some of the realism. There we are. Keep coming along here. Alright, I'll get this little haunch. Do up her lovely little thigh. Head up the inside, since really that's where we want to start anyway. You can see I'm mostly just painting this color over all the little spiny bits. That eventually, I mean, like, she's got these scales on here. But eventually I'll be picking those out with brown and kind of a desert red brown color. So I'm not too worried about covering them up, because it'll be very easy to paint over the upraised portions with the different colors. It would be much more difficult if, let's say, I painted up all these scales, got them to look just perfect, and then afterwards tried to paint all this flesh all around the outside of those scales. Can you imagine trying to paint that accurately? Maybe some of you can. I'm not good enough yet. And I'm not sure that's really a skill I want to develop. I think if I get good enough results with this method, then why should I worry? I don't currently have any plans for winning any painting competitions. Now, I won't lie, I would love to win the best painted army in the Journeyman League that I'm in right now. And if not best painted, then best sport. Now, for sure, I'm not going to win the Warlord prize. That's the one for the person who wins the most matches. As much as I loved this game, I am not an overly proficient player. I've played a total of 6 games, and I won once. And then, in later analysis, because of course I wanted to see, okay, how did I win that, and how can I do that again? I realized so I won on a caster assassination. And upon later analysis, reflected that I had actually sent my war beast out of control range for the assassination. And so really, the assassination would not have happened. I would not have been able to buy the extra attacks that were necessary. So, Ian, I've only met you the once, but you really did win that game. If, by some miracle, you happen upon this video, I'm sorry I cheated. I didn't realize I was cheating, and you didn't realize I was cheating either. But, so ultimately, I've played 6 games and won none of them. So I am not going to win, at least I don't think I'm going to win, the Warlord Prize, or whatever it's called for winning the most games. But I would love to win the best painted, or possibly the best sport, best sportsmanship. I try to go the extra mile to sympathize with my opponents, always give them the benefit of the doubt, and when there's a question about measuring, when they're like half a millimeter out, or if I'm half a millimeter out, I always try to kind of sway it their way. And perhaps that's why I haven't won. But for me, the joy of playing, the camaraderie, even with, it's been remarkable, because I'm playing against these opponents, right? It's not like we're on the same team, but there's a lot of camaraderie in this sport. Alright, I really want to get the rest of this coat on, but I have run out of flesh tone on my wet pad. Hold on just a minute. There we go. And this is called Desert Sand. If you care to duplicate it, I don't know why you would. But if you do, if you care at all, that's what it's called. And we'll scoop up some of this matte medium. Mix it in here. Alright, well, we're about half done. Maybe a little more. We'll start on the inside and work our way out. Start along the body here. Work our way out. Get all these gills. I'm worried that was too thick. So I'm going to kind of thin it out with some water. Alright, and then we'll try and soak some of it up. Soak some of it up. Alright. Let's get a little more matte medium. Thin it out a little bit more. Alright, there we go, all over that shoulder. Again, not worried about all the little knobbly bits. All over. Lovely scales. Because we'll be picking those out later. Alright. his wings. I want to get these edges. I realize I just missed some of the edges on these wings that I've already done. So while these wings are primarily two-dimensional, they do have this back side that I want to make sure we get a good layer on. Alright, that looks good. While I'm thinking about it, I'll hit the back side of these wings too. There we go. And we'll go for the top. A little bit of water. And we talked about a pink flesh tone to be added onto certain parts of the bolt thrower, like the armpits. I'm going to do something similar with this nerf. Probably right in all these armpit areas where there would be lots of blood flow. So originally, the Everblight Factions color theme is very purple and black with snowy ground, because in the lore they are in the Great White North of the place. And when I decided that I was going to have a desert themed, I just decided, well, what would make the Everblight dragons so purple? And I think it was just because they're cold. Now that's partly because I'm a very Northern European skin tone myself. Growing up, I had a flesh tone just like Elsa from Frozen. You know, white and kind of a blue-purple undertone. But if I ever got into the sun, or if I ever got hot, my flesh would turn kind of a yellowy red color. So that's how I decided to do this. To give them a yellowy white color, with the assumption that they are not actually going to get sunburned. That the blight would protect them from sunburn. Or something. Maybe that's wishful thinking. I suffered so much from sunburn that I don't want my little pet dragons to have to deal with sunburn. And since I have the power to say so, I say so. If someone were to come up to me and say, Mike, why don't your Everblight dragons get sunburned? And I will say, because I said so. Like a self-righteous father. That layer went on a bit thick. I'm going to try and thin that out just a little bit. Okay, almost done. There we are. Let's make sure you can see what I'm doing here, because I can hardly see what I'm doing here. Right here in the armpit. well-muscled arm. Back in there. All right. I think that's okay for a first layer. And now we'll let that dry. And we're still shiny wet on Krissa. So I think we'll call that a day. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your patience, your attendance. If you liked this video, please like it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Once again, I've been Mike, and this is LTP, Learn to Paint with Mike. And, you know, most YouTubers have a catchy phrase to say goodbye, and I don't. So, here's my catchy phrase. Bye.